Hello everybody, very pleased to see you this afternoon. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Margaret Singh, President of Dying with Dignity Tasmania, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce our guest speaker, Mike Gaffney.
Thank you.
As you would know, Mike is the independent member for Mersey in the Legislative Council. Now, Mike and our paths crossed quite a few years ago now. I think it was when you became President of the Local Government Association.
Yeah.
When Mike became President of the Local Government Association, and at the time I was Director of Partnership Agreements in the Local Government Division of the Department of Premier and Cabinet. And in 2013, when we did think there was a very good chance of the legislation going through, of course it failed by one vote in the end, and there was an issue of who would take the bill, private member's bill, through the upper house. I had no hesitation in suggesting Mike as the best person to do that. I'd seen him take thoughtful, careful, hard-working approach to quite complicated issues that came forward before the Premier's Local Government Council, and I had great confidence in Mike being able to deal with the legislation and take it through the House in a very conscientious way. So I was dispatched to ask Mike if he would do that. I think it took you about 5 minutes, didn't it, Mike? And agreed. And so the contact with Mike since then, and particularly in the last 6 months or so, has been a very valuable one, because Mike said that he would like to do an overseas study tour to build his knowledge of the situation elsewhere, and it has turned out to be an extraordinarily valuable asset for the proposed Tasmanian bill. The title of the talk today really says a great deal about our approach to it, and that is learning from experience and getting a safe and effective voluntary assisted dying choice for Tasmanians. The many reviews that have been done in the last few years, Victoria, Western Australia, and a number of Canadian ones, have all found that the laws that have been in place, sometimes for a considerable period, Oregon is now up to their 21st year, are all working safely, in the sense that there is no evidence of risks or abuses to people who might be regarded as vulnerable to coercion, vulnerable to making an unwise decision, an ill thought out decision, making a decision when they don't have the mental decision making capacity, and so on. There is no evidence that there is any risk from the legislation. So we can be sure that if there is a very careful process involving at least 2 doctors, requirements such as voluntariness, decision-making capacity, and so on, that a careful regime like that is going to be safe. But it does have to be effective for the people who need that legislation. And the approach that's been taken in the Tasmanian bills, the last 2, and we're proposing for this one, is providing a last resort option for people with very serious suffering, intolerable to them and unable to be relieved by other means. And that suffering is due to advanced, incurable, irreversible, serious medical conditions that they've got no chance of recovery from, and there seems to be absolutely no chance of significant improvement or lasting improvement. So that's the general approach. Anyway, I will hand over to Mike to talk about the response to our approach that he found overseas, and the other experiences that he had that he's brought back to inform what we're going to do.
Thank you.
And just before Mike speaks, the aim is to do this for Mike to speak for, 20, 25 minutes.
Not that long.
Or not that long, he says, and then to open it up for questions and comments. I'd like to welcome in particular the other members of Parliament who are here today, and I know that you all have to get back. Sue Hickey, Speaker, pleased to see you. Alison Standen and Josh Willey. We also have apologies from other members of Parliament. Both Ruth Forrest and Rob Valentine were coming but have found that they're not able to. And there are apologies from... Elise Archer, Guy Barnett, Michael Ferguson, Michelle O'Byrne, Jeremy Rockcliffe and Mark Shelton from the House of Assembly, Craig Farrell and Ivan Dean, Kerry Finch and Tanya Rattray and Joe Seeker from the Upper House. There are a large number of other apologies from members and so on who I won't read out for now. We'll keep that for the AGM later. After Mike has finished and the guest speaking part of it has been completed, we will have a short break for people to help themselves to food. There are sandwiches and so on in the room over there, and drinks. A bit of a distraction from small people. And then we will have the formal AGM. People who are not members are also welcome to join us for the AGM, but they're never the most exciting of meetings, so you're also very welcome to leave if you want to. The one apology I will mention in particular, though, is Robin Maggs, our Vice President, who's very sorry not to be able to be here today, but her professional responsibilities are keeping her away. She particularly wanted me to say how sorry she was to be missing it. But as you'll see, we are filming the Mike's speech so that we will be able to make it available to that large number of people who've apologised and who can't be here. So I will again say, over to you, Mike.
Thank you. Thanks very much, everybody, and thanks, Margaret, for the invitation. I'll remain seated because I'm connected to some sort of cord for the taping. I'm a little bit nervous about this morning or this afternoon's discussion, mainly because I come from a place of a person who's just really interested in the issue as a social issue and what I believe is correct. Now, I'm better known on the Northwest Coast. I'm not so well known down here, and that has advantages. But before we start, I would like to pay my respect to the traditional owners, its elders, past and present and future. I'd also like to acknowledge and recognise the contribution of our relatively more contemporary arrivals to the state and the value contribution they've made to our history and heritage. Whilst I am better known, I might give you a 3 or 4 minute snapshot of who I am, because I think that helps, because it won't be that far away, hopefully, that I'll be representing the group here and other people in Tasmania who are interested in this issue. And I want you to fully understand and appreciate my experiences and why I'm here. Very quickly, born in Devonport, lived on a farm, brother and sister, mum and dad. Mum had 3 kids by the time she was 22, that sort of thing. Very working class family. Dad was a slaughterman. Spent primary school, Reese High School, moved out to Port Sorell where Dad ran the fitness camps out there. My mum finished school in grade 10 to look after her sick mother. She raised 3 kids by the time she was 22, and then by the time she was 29 she completed grade 10, year 11 and 12, had finished 4 years of college and became a teacher. So from my point of view, there's a fair bit of drive in our family as a family unit. I'm very fortunate that I do have my family, and we have good discussions about this. My mum and dad, fortunately, are still both alive, 83 and 79. When I was year 12, I was only very young for that year group. I was 14 in grade 10, because that's what happened in primary schools in Tasmania. When you were 4, they just threw you into grade 1. And so I did decide, I was picked to go for an AFS scholarship, which is American Field Service Scholarship, and I had 12 months in the United States in Laguna Beach in California. And that was quite an important part in my life, because it made me realise that when I came back to Tasmania, I better do some schoolwork, I better get a career. And so I came back, studied really hard, and I was awarded a studentship for a teacher's position for 4 years. So I was a physical education teacher. My teaching journey took me to Murray High School, which is in Queenstown. I had 4 years there, 3 years at Bridgewater High School, which I thoroughly enjoyed as a teacher. Then I went to Latrobe, Devonport. My wife, we met on the West Coast. She was also teaching there, and she taught at Ogilvy for 6 years. And Mel and I then had 12 months in London on a teaching exchange in 1993. This is the abridged version of my life. And so when we came back, my wife said to me, well, Michael, you're too old to play much sport anymore, so why don't you... I was 33, so I could be... Well, at that level I was playing. And so she said, why don't you stand for council? Because the council elections were in 1994. So I did, and I thought, well, if I got elected, I'd have 2 terms on the council. You know, that's good for the community. And before I left, I was the phys ed teacher at school. I was the Latrobe footy playing coach, and I was the basketball coach. So I was quite well known within the community, I would think. So I stood, I got elected. I had 4 years as councillor, 4 years as deputy mayor. Oh, then the mayor died. Miles Ford was a lovely man. He died, and so Bert became the mayor and I became the deputy mayor, and then he died. And I'm thinking, this is not a career path for me. I've got to think carefully about this. And so then I had 12 years as the mayor. And I loved it. I absolutely loved that time. So I had 20 years in local government. About when I was 46, my general manager said, Michael, why don't you stand for president of Local Government Association? And that was quite interesting, because I'd never really thought about government as a career, but I really enjoyed it. And that was up against some quite well-known figures, Janie Dickinson, a guy of Greens from down here in Clarence, Darryl Geraghty, Sue French from Burnie, so quite some experience. So I was very pleased to have that position. So at that time I said to my wife, and I was an assistant principal in a school at that time, and I said, Mel, I wouldn't mind doing this job. She said, oh, that's fine. It only pays $35,000 a year, and at that stage I was on $86,000 as assistant principal, and she said, well, Michael, what do you want to do? I said, I want the job. And she said, go for it. And so I was really pleased to have that support. And just as a side issue, my wife developed epilepsy very badly when she was 29, 30. So for 15 years, she couldn't drive. It took a long time to manage that whole scenario. So we missed the whole baby stage just because of the life circumstances. But I'm fortunate I have 3 lovely nieces, nephew, and a great nephew. So then I had Norma Jamison retired as member for Mersey. And so 10 years ago, I put my hand up for that, and I ran against the now, Steve Martin, Lynn Laycock, and Norma's daughter, and was elected. So I did 5 years as mayor and 5 years as member of the upper house, and they changed the rules in 2014. So that's when I resigned from the mayor's job. So that's my life in a nutshell. As far as the whole, and I would like to say, sometimes when I speak about this issue and this topic, it affects people in different ways. And I remember 2 weeks ago at the Youth Parliament that the voluntary assisted dying was one of the issues there. And I was quite, as I was sat in the chair where Sue does, and she does a much better job than I do, but I was very nice to them. But at the end of the time, there were some of the kids were quite upset with how frank I was with, well, this is the issue you are dealing with, and this is what is happening. And when they had their break, because I hadn't really explained to them, knowing that they were 17-year-olds, there might be a situation in their life at the moment that is quite confronting. So if there's somebody in the room at the moment and I start to say things and you need to please excuse yourself, please do. I don't want to be here to upset, but I have to explain. As far as death goes, I've had no personal contact with any family member. I have no issue, I have no background affiliation where I can say, yes, I've seen my father go through this, or a great uncle or an aunt or whatever. I have nothing there at all, other than I've seen two dead people. And it's important because one was like a pseudo-grandfather who was passing away and was being looked after, palliative care. I was with Dot, his wife, and we looked after him for 4 or 5 days and he died. And it's really interesting. They say they die peacefully, and I think that happens, but it's not a nice way to see somebody go, even if it's peaceful. It just took too long. And for Dot, you had to be there for Dot. And when I thought that Neil had passed away, I sort of said, Dot, we need to go for a walk. And we walked out, and I just said to the nurse, get in there. But that was, and I had some time to reflect on that, and I thought, it was as good as it could be, but it wasn't what I would want, even in that situation. The other time was a 15-year-old boy came to school and said, Mr. Gaffney, I can't wake my father. I said, well, we better go. And father had been known to drinking a bit. And so it was my job looking after kids with challenging behaviours. Went in, Dad's 43, Dad's dead in the chair. So dealing with that issue. And that was quite alarming. Thank you very much. That was quite alarming for me. I didn't realise. It happened on the Monday morning, and the young boy used to have to come and see me every day because if he wasn't in a good mood, I wouldn't let him go to classes. He'd be with me for the day. That's the sort of 15-year-old boy he was. And I knew he wasn't going to settle. So we went and saw Dad, and that was amazing because I sort of, not amazing in a good way, amazing like, what do I do? I walked into the room and I thought, I didn't know whether he was dead or alive, and I sort of leaned close. I thought, God, if I'm too close, he might thump me if he wakes up. And then I put my hand on his chest, and this came out, and it was just a terrible sound. And there was a humorous side to that, and I think you've got to see humour in things. I rang the police, and I said, Triple O, I said, I think there's a dead body in the house. How old? 43. Don't let anyone in the house. Because of the age of the person, there was something could have been suspicious. And so the young boys outside said, you stay out there, and I've got some doctors and that coming and some people coming to have a look. So I didn't want to tell the young boy because I didn't know clinically that he was dead. And then some guy started to walk up the driveway, and I said, look, you can't come in. And he said, I want to get my meat tray from last night, because they'd been at some place last night. And he said, my meat tray's in the fridge and we're having drinks. And I said to him, we can't quite go in at the moment, just wait there. And so then the police and the ambulance came. This guy was down at the fence, and the guys come in, and I said, Rowan, you wait here with me. So we were out there, and then the doctors or somebody came out and said to me, the police called me and said, we have to tell the boy. And I said, who? And the young policeman said, can you? And I said, yes, I will, because I had some relationship. So young boy, tell him Dad's died, terrible, up the street. I went and raced after him. The humorous side of this story is not there, and it was just terrible. This young boy just... But as I was coming back down, going back in the guy's walking out the house with his meat tray. So he knocked on the door and got the meat tray out of the fridge. So that's the sort of person I am, because I think it's important, because with the process of bills, what happens in our place is most of the bills come from downstairs, and they're carried upstairs by the government. There are very few private members' bills. And I introduced one 3 years ago, a fire offences bill. And at the time, the member for Western Tiers, Greg, said, Michael, in his 13 or 14 years in Parliament, there'd only probably been 4 or 5 private members' bills. And of those 4 or 5, only one other had passed. And so it was 2 or 3 years of long work with some very talented people around me, young people around me, helping me get this bill to a stage where it was passed. And it was passed in our place. And then once it was passed down there, the Minister, Reen Hitting, actually said that he would manage the bill downstairs, which was quite a coup for a minister to carry somebody else's bill, because they thought it was a good bill. So the process is quite involved. And I'm not all over every aspect of the Tasmanian Bill. Margaret's all over every aspect of the Tasmanian Bill. I'm sort of about 70% now. Before I left and went away, I was probably 30%. By the time it gets to the table, I will be 100% over it, because that's what I need to do. And that was part of the reason why I decided to try and see what's happening in other places, because I know that if I'm going to carry this bill, whether it starts downstairs or upstairs, I'm not sure, but if I'm going to carry the bill, I want to make certain I do a good job so the people who are relying on this bill to get passed can say, yes, he knows what he's on about, he knows how to present, this is what he's doing, this is the background. And so what I decided to do in the break, I've never applied in 10 years of being a member of the Parliament. I've never applied for a travel grant, and travel grants come up reasonably frequently every year for people to apply for, and they're a $3,500 travel grant. So I applied for a travel grant because I now had a reason to actually travel. And so when the travel grant came through, and that was very helpful, because I think the flights, and you'll understand from the flights, I flew to Frankfurt and to Amsterdam. I met with people in Amsterdam. I trained over to Ghent in Belgium, met with people in Ghent. I trained down to Zurich, met with people in Zurich. I flew across to Montreal, and then flew up to Halifax and met people in Halifax. I then flew to Vancouver, met people in Vancouver, and then flew down to Portland in Oregon to meet people in Oregon before I flew back. I did that in just over 14 days. So it was a lot of flying, and I think I had 23 hours or something of interviews. But to make it easier for you and for me, and I had to do an Andrew Denton on the people I've met. Margaret, if you could pass those out on that side as well, on that side. What I've enabled you to do now, because I knew that I'm not going to be able to give enough information on things that I found. I've taped 23 of the hours of my travel. On the back of the page you're having a look at are all the different people that I actually met with and spoke with. If there is any person on that list that you think you'd be interested to hear, I can forward you that podcast. So I can email that to you. So for those of you who want to listen to the whole 23 hours, feel free. For those of you who might choose one person from that list that is of who you believe would be. But I have to say from the outset, organising this, I've never been so wonderfully received by a group of people all over the world who just want to do the best thing by their community. And I was so heartened by, first of all, their professionalism, their enormous capacity for just getting the job done. And I will sort of allude to that in a second. I suppose I am seen as socially progressive. I've been called that term sometimes. I really didn't know what it meant for a long while, but I do. But I'm learning. I think socially progressive means I don't see Parliament as just a place for government business, running the economy, making rules and regulations about people trespassing, that sort of thing. To me, Parliament is a privilege, and for Parliament we have to address issues that need addressing. We have to confront social issues. We have to do that. And if you look over the last 3 or 4 years, there have been some major social issues, not only in Tasmania, but in Australia. This is the next major social issue that we'll be facing, I think, in Tasmania. And I need you to understand what it is like as a politician when any issue comes to, whether it's an estate or whatever. I did point out, copy off one of these. We get sent one of these every 2 weeks from a group called Australian Care Alliance. And it's a 2-page newsletter basically portraying all the things that is wrong about voluntary assisted dying or euthanasia. They highlight all the inconsistencies in the world. They look at and they deliberately put their lens over any statistic, any piece of information. And Margaret would say to me, I walked in, "You're not going to give them this, are you?" I said, "It's an example of what we receive." Not only that, but we think we're all sent a book. And I thought it was only me because I was the advocate for this, apparently for this, but most politicians, this is a euthanasia policy and public policy about why not to support euthanasia. So what I'm saying to the small group of the people here is that your voice is going to be very important in this journey that we take if we get to stage 1 and get further, and I hope we do, because unless we have people from Tasmania willing to put their thoughts and voices forward through whatever profession you're in or from whatever relationship you may have, then it is going to be very difficult for the people in our place to actually get this bill over the line, if that's our intention. I gather that's why you're all here, is because you have an empathy for voluntary euthanasia, voluntary assisted dying, whatever it likes to be called. So that's what that's about. I think one of the things that I found most invigorating about my trip, and if you think about it, I'm travelling across the world and I've just had sittings and working in legislation here and coming back to estimates, whatever. And as I'm going from place to place, I'm reading up about the people that I'm about to interview. And I'm reading up because it is so involved in each of the different countries. Although the end result, I think, is what we all want, is a painless, dignified death for the person, the way that each country has gone about it and each jurisdiction is totally different. And I found that quite illuminating. And so what I will do, if on this page, I'm just going to briefly talk about the different countries and different aspects that I've picked up from that, and hopefully if there's something I say there you might think, I wouldn't mind listening what Mike said about the Netherlands or Switzerland. So I'll fill out the form, I'll ask him to send that to me. And so then you've got a chance. I'm definitely not an Andrew Denton in my interview ability either, so you have to bear with me. But from the top, Amsterdam, Rob Jonneker, he has been the main driving force, I think, from a doctor's perspective or from a clinician's perspective about what's happening there. Agnes Volbert's just come in recently. She's the CEO, and she's the first CEO they've had that's come from a political background, not a health background. So the thing that I captured from Rob was they can see some in their bill, in their legislation, they can see some areas that they could improve, that they could make stronger. And I said, well, why don't you do that through the legislative passage that you have or the process you have? He said, because it's a very much a balanced issue, even still in their country. If they were to open up legislation, they do open up potentially a can of worms, depending on how many in the current parliament are in favour or not of the legislation. So even though he said we can see there are areas that we need to improve, we just can't afford to go there at the moment. And they have some real issues with the reporting of any sort of event, and they term it an event. And so it's not the prosecutor, the public. It's a bit like our registrar, the person who then examines all the deaths that happen.
The review committees?
Yeah, the coroner? Yeah. The coroner in that place had come out a couple of times, the recent coroner had come out a couple of times, not in favour of a couple of the decisions made by a couple of physicians regarding an event. And so they were a little bit sensitive about where to go. I hope I haven't misrepresented that. The next place I went to, Agnes was really, I really liked talking to her from a political point of view in the way that what she was dealing with and dealing with the functionality. They don't get any funding from the government for their cause. It is all philanthropic and volunteer donations. Going to Belgium, Luc Dillians and Kenneth Chambert, theirs is really interesting. I like what they presented to me with the Belgian model. They have a little bit different take on a 12 to 18-year-olds. It's a little bit that they've got into their legislation, which is really interesting because if you think about it, if somebody's in insufferable pain when they're 16, 17 or whatever, it's intolerable pain regardless of the age. But in Belgium, they have that capacity and that written into their legislation where they can address that situation for minors, I suppose. What they highlighted that they didn't have in their legislation, and they said they wish they had, was they wanted some place where every person who went to their clinician or their physician or GP to get a referral for an event, that it should have been recorded and it wasn't. So some person might have gone and presented and did nothing with that, and then 2 years later might have gone again. They had no way of recording all those statistics, and they felt that would have been better if they did have some way. So they recognised that. Again, it was, from my point of view, and I'm probably remembering that much of a conversation that was that long with all the people. And this is what I'm sort of highlighting. When you go through the tape, you might think, why didn't Michael talk about that, and that? That's so much more important than what he highlighted on. But this is what I can remember at the moment. Sylvan Lully was very interesting in Zurich. And their office is 12 kilometres outside of Zurich. And I was asked not to be able to disclose where I was going. And it's not as though it was a closed affair, but it was one where they don't like to advertise too much about what they do. And I gather that within Switzerland, and Margaret would know more, there tended to be a group that started and their laws are different. And then there's been a bit of a branch split here somewhere with what was the intent and purpose to another intent and purpose. And that's fine, that happens in organisations. Again, I think that conversation went forever and it was great. He was so experienced in what they wanted to try and do. And they did make comment, and I mean this, and not only Sylvan, but the Kenneth and Luke and Rob, about the Victorian legislation. And I will do this very respectfully for the Victorians because I think it's difficult to bring in legislation anywhere in a nation, first up. But the comment from all of those groups was the Victorian legislation is too restrictive. It is just too restrictive in what, but I said to Sylvan, what would you like? He said, I'd just like 2 sentences. I'd just like a person has the right to choose to die and should be assisted. He said, and nothing else. But he said, I know that that's not going to get through. But they did point out, and you know when sometimes you go to a conference and there's a running joke about a situation that might have happened? They had a conference on the 13th and 14th of April in Belgium, and it was an assisted dying conference. Part of that was, and don't forget the 68 restrictions they have with Victorian legislation. Not in a nasty way, but in a way that kept coming back. Do you know what I mean? And so I remembered that. And it happened when I flew to Canada. The same thing, that they all said, they were all pleased that Australia had taken the step, and they were all pleased the Victorian legislation was going in, but they could all see issues with it, they felt. The Canadian one was where I spent most of my time, and there I met Jocelyn, James, Sinead, Gus and Gord. All had different things to say to me. I arrived there late Saturday night. I met with 4 of them on the Monday. 3 on the Monday and 2 on the Tuesday before I flew to Vancouver. But Jocelyn was just fantastic. She rang me on the Sunday and she said, what are you doing? And I said, nothing, I'm just going to go down to the market. She said, do you want to come? I'll take you out to the beach and we can talk about it. And that was the only time I didn't take my phone because I didn't even think about I just thought we'd talk. We sat there for 2 hours and talked about all the different issues. And it was really good for me to be able to ask all the questions that I needed to know if I was going to represent a group of people in Tasmania with this bill. And And when she dropped me back off, I said to, I don't know, it was 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I said to the young chap, where can I go to have a drink and listen to some music? And he said, go, and this is my bar story. He said, go, and I said, no, I don't want anything really noisy. He said, oh, there is an Irish bar, Naughty Nelly's or something down the road, go there. And I went down and I sat there and I just listened to the Irish band. It was quite good. And I'm having a beer. And a chap of about the age of, I don't know, mid-40s came and sat next to me, or late 40s, I think. And he sort of said, oh, where are you from? And told him, and he said, what are you doing? I told him. He said, I'm so pleased I sat next to you. And I said, why is that? And out of all the places I could have been and all the people who sat next to me in a bar, this guy said, my dad last year had signed up for an event. He had signed up, his medication was to come, and 10 days later he was to do that. He was because Dad was in the condition that he just didn't want to go on and he was in a lot of pain. I said, what happened? He said, and I hope I've got this correct, I think I have. He said, on the way for his physicians to come and see him 3 days before they were supposed to get there, they were both killed in a car accident, husband and wife, killed in a car accident. By the time they sent another person there, his father's dementia it was like 2 weeks later, his father's dementia had gone so far that when the new clinician said to him, are you ready for your event? He said, don't worry, darling, I'll outlive you. So what had happened, Dad had gone from a place where he was quite willing to leave to a place where he no longer, and so the event couldn't take place. So this young guy is telling me, and his wife's Catholic, so he said, I really couldn't speak to my wife about it because she is a devout Catholic. So he said, I moved in with Dad, and he said, I thought I could do it. He said, for the first week it was fine until his dad was a smoker. He said, until he was lighting cigarettes in his bed, it was just dangerous. I then moved him in to a home, and so I went and lived with Dad and looked after him. He said the last 6 days of his dad's life, he said, were terrible. He said no matter how much they tried to alleviate his pain, he knew it just wasn't working. And he said it was horrible. And he said, but if the gods had been in the right place, Dad wouldn't have gone through that journey. He wouldn't have gone through, he would have lived, or he would have died or passed away a dignified death. And so he's sitting there telling me, tears are falling down his face, and he said, but I don't know what to do with the information. And it so happened the next day, I was meeting with Sinead Kokal, who's the CEO of Dying with Dignity Canada. And I just said, I think that I might be able to help you. So I got his email address and whatever. I said, I'm meeting with some people tomorrow, and I know that they're looking at stories for their website so that they can explain to the rest of Canada, or Canadians, what it's all about. And so I sent him the email the next day. He was just so excited, and Sinead said, that's just the story we want. Because the difference with the Canadian legislation, for those who don't know, here in Australia and other places, it's from the ground up, it's from the state up. In Canada, the Canadian government came and said, you will have legislation for voluntary assisted dying. You will have this. And they were supposed to have it in about 12 months, but it took about 16 to 18 months to tie it out. So it was the state of their federal government saying, this is going to happen in all provinces. And so that's the difference. And so they were found themselves in the situation, and that's where I met with Gus Grant, who's a lawyer. He really likes fly fishing too. He might be coming over to Tasmania with his kid. And Gord Gabutz is a neurologist, and he comes back to me, he said, I just want you to understand how it works. And he said, and the fear that we had with some of our clinicians getting into that space, because there's got to be a lot of training and stuff go in ahead to make sure that they're prepared for what they want to do and make sure that there's support networks. But he said, of the so many events he'd been to, he said, I would not have missed any of them. He said, because they're totally different to anything that he's seen. He said, and there's a really good film, How to Die in Oregon. Actually, it's a bit of an alarming film, so it goes for an hour and 22. but it's quite a good film, and I've watched that since I've returned. And there's one scene there, the whole family around, all having a glass of champagne, you know, said the goodbyes, hard on all the people around the family. Mum says, I'm ready to go now. You know, what a better way to go than in that type of manner. And if it were my parents, it would hurt me undoubtedly to see them not be there. But at the end of the day, that's their choice, and that's what I would want to do. And so I then flew to Vancouver, and Ellen Weeb, you have no idea the strength of character of that lady. She picked me up and she said, we're going to a restaurant up, and it was great. It was a revolving one right at the top. It's sort of all around Vancouver because I was only there for about 18 hours, or less than 14 hours, I think. And she got out of her car, went to the boot, lifted up the boot. She had straps on both of her arms, got out the little scooter that she had because she's can't walk upstairs, and that she has a heart condition or whatever. Went to the restaurant. We went upstairs. She talked to me for an hour and a half. It was just fantastic. And yet, in her life, what she'd had to contend with, she'd put that all aside because she was the chief advocate in that province and flying all over Alaska, flying to everywhere she had to go to be able to help people out. Or sorry, not Alaska, but further north into the provinces to help people, and people coming to see her. And the issue between this person was in a Catholic hospital, and they weren't allowed to do the procedure there, and they had to move that person from that hospital to another place to be able to do the event, but the pain the person was in going from there, moving to there. So all of these issues that they spoke to me about, you really need to listen to the tapes, I think, to get a full understanding of that. My last one, because I'm aware of the time, when I flew down to Oregon, Portland, sorry, and George Igme, I don't know how much you can throw at people. His wife died. His 34-year-old son 5 years ago had an aneurysm and died. His 46-year-old, no, his son, committed suicide. His 46-year-old daughter died through an aneurysm or whatever. And this guy stood out there as an advocate fighting for people's rights to choose. You know, the strength of characters of some of the people I met. And so I'm really aware that when the bill comes to the table, and it's happened and I've read up about the Victorian model and those sort of places, and sometimes politicians feel as though they've got to leave their mark on any piece of legislation just because they may have sections from the community that might talk to them, and that's fine. But when I listen to the experience in the room and the years of experience these people have had in, and I'm not going to call it an industry, I'm going to call it an area that they're so familiar with, I stand back in amazement at their capacity to continue to go on when they've had all those fights. And so the main reason I went was to get as much information that I can, so that when I come back to Tasmania and I'm in the upper house, hopefully carrying this bill, that you people will know that I've done as much as I can to make sure that I'm informed, and I want to be able to answer all of the questions. I want to be able to block all the detractors from this bill and what this means. Because at the end of the day, it's your right to choose. And it doesn't matter what you choose, it's your right. And I think that's very, very important, that people have the right to choose a dignified death. That's about it.
Thank you very much, Mark. I'm conscious of the time, particularly for our members of Parliament, including Mike. Perhaps if we could have just a couple of questions or comments, and then even after Mike has gone, there may be some further conversations and discussion that we can have. On the way in, you may have seen on the table one of our information papers about the current situation of voluntary assisted dying around the world. It's already up to, I think, its third amendment as more issues happen. The main state in the US, their legislation was passed in June, and that brought to 15 the number of laws specifically for voluntary assisted dying, and 19 jurisdictions. The other recent amendment to this is the policy, the new policy of the Royal Australian College of GPs, which is about patient-centred decision-making for the end of life. It's a very good policy indeed. Now, this is a hard copy of what is an electronic copy that you'll find on our website with all the links to all of the documents mentioned in this particular paper. If you don't have access and want copies of any of the things that are highlighted that come out in blue, please contact us, because many of them are very important to the debate. We'll be sending it to members of Parliament anyway. But over to any other questions quickly before people have to go.
Just a brief comment. I have a friend whose father was a European human rights judge in Amsterdam. He availed himself of that legislation, but all the family was able to gather from all sorts of countries, and it was a very peaceful planned and thought about death. By contrast, my sister-in-law, who died at the age of 39 with cancer, was a very brave, very courageous person, did everything to hope for her recovery. But then when it was impossible, she didn't want to live, and she persuaded my brother to assist her suicide. And my brother was devastated, crushed up a few sleeping tablets, vitamin C and iron tablets or whatever. And my sister-in-law very lovingly said goodbye to her two young children, explained everything that was happening. They were all courageous, said goodbye to my brother, then had a long sleep and woke up the next morning. And she was furious with my brother, you know. She abused him. She said, I've only asked you to do one thing in my entire life and you've failed me. So it was devastating for him that had he succeeded, it would have been a crime, assisting a person committing suicide. Then when she went in at the last stages of care, she had a discussion, and she was given such a level of morphine that the doctor said to her that there's only one other person over 35 years who hadn't died with this level of morphine. If I gave you any more, you know, it would be identified as an assisted death. So she had to go through her prolonged agony, not only with bones breaking in her body, she was amazingly courageous, but she had, I used to go up each lunch hour to visit her. She would start a conversation with one thought and then another. It's almost like having schizophrenia because her brain had been affected. She hated that. She was an intelligent person who could no longer hold a conversation and had all those other things, terminally ill, deep pain and suffering, but there's a lot of psychological stuff that goes when you're a strong person, you have courage, and yet you see the changes in you that affect the changes of people around you. So just a brief comment.
Well, thank you. I'm aware that some of my colleagues need to go. Perhaps with the, and I don't mean to trivialise.
I understand.
Yeah. And I think that with the forms, it might be easier if you do want to access any of those podcasts. Write your name on the back or your email, tick the ones you want, and if you pass them all to Margaret, then by the end of it, by the end of the day, then Margaret can just get them to me, and I'll get them to you as soon as I can. It won't be probably to the weekend because I'm sick for the rest of the week. I won't be back till then.
All right, well, on behalf of everybody here, I'd like to thank Mike very much indeed for talking today about his experience, but also about the trip itself, which was assisted in some way by the study tour money, but not entirely. And on behalf of Dying with Dignity, Mike would like to present you with this. And it might prevent you from going into other bars and having very interesting conversations, but only for a short time.
It's only a small one.
Thank you very much.
Just the only last thing, the reason why it's being taped is Sylvan Ruley. I actually have a distribution list where I send the newsletter that Margaret does, and I'm getting feedback from those people I've met. I've got them as a group, and they're saying, please keep us informed about the Tasmanian journey. It was actually Sylvan who, I think it was Sylvan, wasn't it, sent an email saying, Michael, you should make sure you film your presentation. And I didn't even give it a thought. He said, very few people would have travelled the world to have experienced what you've done and be able to bring that back as part of the story. And I found that, and that was the reason why it's here today, is because Sylvan sent me that advice from his experience. So that's good. And if at any stage during this passage and process of the bill or progress that you would like to speak to me or contact me, I'm more than happy to have that conversation, especially where you think there are things I can improve. That would be really helpful. So thank you once again, and I'm pleased that you all came out. Thank you.